ChatGPT said, Emily Turner had always believed she was living the kind of love people dream about. When she married Daniel, she thought she had found safety, kindness, and forever. He was calm, responsible, and steady. The kind of man who made promises and kept them. For the first few years, their home in Seattle felt like a painting come to life. Warm lights, laughter in the kitchen. Lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and sunlight through the curtains. But as the years passed, something between them began to fade. Not in anger or betrayal, but in silence. Daniel's job as an architect became his world. He worked late, missed dinners, and came home tired. Talking more about deadlines than dreams. Emily tried to understand. She told herself this was what love looked like: sacrifice and patience. Still, the quiet started to hurt. The house that once felt full now echoed with emptiness. She spent her evenings painting, trying to fill the silence with color. But no shade could hide the loneliness growing inside her. Then one autumn evening, Daniel came home smiling for the first time in weeks. "Guess who's back in town?" he said. Ryan, his best friend from college, the one who had moved to Chicago years ago. Emily had heard stories about him, about the wild friend who balanced Daniel's seriousness. She smiled politely, trying to match his excitement. "That's great," she said. "You should invite him over." When Ryan showed up a few days later, he brought an energy that filled the house instantly. He was tall, with kind eyes and a voice that carried warmth. He greeted Emily with an easy smile and a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Daniel said you love painting," he said. "These reminded me of something you'd capture on canvas." She laughed softly. Surprised by the simple gesture, it had been a long time since anyone noticed what she liked. Dinner that night felt alive. Ryan told funny stories from their college days, and Daniel laughed like he hadn't in months. Emily listened, smiling, but part of her heart ached, realizing how much she missed that version of her husband. The one who could laugh freely. When Ryan left, Daniel seemed lighter, and she felt grateful, hoping his friend's return might bring back the spark they'd lost. Over the next few weeks, Ryan became a regular visitor. Sometimes he dropped by to see Daniel. Other times just to say hello, when Daniel had to work late. Ryan would stay and help Emily clean up after dinner. They talked about everything: books, music, dreams she hadn't shared with anyone in years. There was something easy about him. Something genuine. He listened without interrupting, remembered small things she said, and treated her thoughts like they mattered. It wasn't attraction at first, it was recognition. Ryan reminded her of the warmth she used to feel in her marriage. The kind of connection that came from simply being seen. Still, every time he looked at her with that quiet understanding, she felt something stir. Something she didn't want to name. One evening, Daniel called to say he'd be home late again. Emily tried to hide her disappointment, but Ryan noticed. "You must get tired of waiting," he said gently. She shrugged. "That's marriage, right?" "Maybe," he said softly. "But it's not supposed to feel like waiting." They stood by the window, the city lights glowing beyond the glass. The air between them was heavy but unspoken. Emily stepped back quickly, breaking the moment with a laugh. "I should make more tea," she said. He nodded, but his eyes lingered, not in a way that disrespected her, but as if he wished she could see herself the way he did, alive, creative, deserving. That night, after Ryan left, Emily sat alone with her cup of tea growing cold. Her heart felt confused. She wasn't in love with him. She told herself she was just lonely, craving attention. She looked at the wedding photo on the shelf, the one of her and Daniel smiling under a summer sky, and wondered when that feeling had slipped away. The days that followed were ordinary on the surface, But inside her, everything felt different. Ryan's visits became both a comfort and a weight. He made her laugh again, reminded her of who she used to be. Daniel, unaware of the quiet shift, thanked Ryan for keeping her company. "You've been good for her," he said, half joking. "She's been painting more." Emily wanted to tell Daniel that what she needed wasn't company, it was him. But every time she tried, he was too distracted to hear, so she kept quiet, holding her emotions inside like water behind glass. One rainy Saturday, Ryan invited them both to an art show downtown. Daniel couldn't make it. Another project deadline. Emily almost said no, but Ryan insisted. "You need to get out of the house," he said. "You love art." The gallery was filled with soft light and music, and for the first time in months, Emily felt alive. She moved from painting to painting. Her eyes wide with emotion, Ryan watched her quietly, admiring how the colors reflected in her eyes. "You see things differently," he said. "Most people just look. But you really see." She smiled, a little shy. "I guess painting teaches you to notice," he replied. "Maybe that's why Daniel fell for you." The words hit her unexpectedly, reminding her of a love that had once been effortless. She turned away, linking back a sudden rush of emotion. "Let's not talk about that," she said softly. He nodded, but the air between them had already changed. When he dropped her home that night, she thanked him for the evening. "It felt good to just be me for a while," she said. He smiled. "You should never stop being you." She watched him drive away, her heart heavy, confused, and alive all at once. Inside, the house was dark. Daniel still at work. She sat on the couch, listening to the sound of rain against the window. It wasn't love she felt, it was awakening. The painful kind that reminds you how far you've drifted from yourself. That night, she stood before her canvas and began to paint again. Not to impress anyone, but to feel. Each brushstroke carried pieces of everything she couldn't say: loneliness, gratitude, longing, guilt. When she finished, she looked at the painting and realized it wasn't about Ryan or Daniel. It was about her, the woman she had forgotten she could be. But deep down, she knew this new chapter had only begun. Ryan's friendship had stirred something fragile and real. Daniel's absence still hurt. And Emily stood between two truths: the life she had built, and the connection she couldn't ignore. As she cleaned her brushes, the phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice tired. "Don't wait up, Em. I'll be late again." She smiled faintly, her voice steady. "I wasn't going to," she said. Then she hung up, turned off the lights, and stood in the darkness, wondering when her love story had started feeling like someone else's. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear: her heart was no longer asleep. It had woken up quietly, dangerously, beautifully, and soon everything would change. The weeks after that rainy night passed quietly, but nothing inside Emily felt the same. Every sound in the house felt louder. Every silence felt heavier. She had returned from that art show with colors burning in her chest. Colors she didn't know how to control. Daniel remained distant, always tired, always working. And Ryan, he kept appearing at just the right moments, never asking for more than her company, yet somehow meaning more than anyone else. It started with simple things. Ryan dropping by with takeout when Daniel called to say he'd be late, or texting her about a new art exhibit downtown. Emily told herself it was just friendship, but friendship didn't make her heart skip when she saw his name appear on her phone. Friendship didn't make her smile at the thought of someone noticing her small joys, the ones her husband had long forgotten. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel left for another work trip, promising to be back in a few days. Emily waved goodbye from the porch, but as his car disappeared, A strange emptiness washed over her. That evening, Ryan came over to check in, carrying groceries and that familiar easy smile. "You shouldn't spend your weekend alone," he said. "You'll go crazy in this quiet house." She tried to laugh, but there was truth in his words. They cooked together, moving around the kitchen with a rhythm that felt natural. He teased her when she dropped flour on the floor. She laughed until tears came. It was the kind of laughter that felt rare, a reminder that she was still capable of feeling joy. After dinner, they sat by the fireplace with mugs of tea. The rain had started again, soft and steady. Ryan looked into the fire and said, "You used to smile more back in college when Daniel talked about you. He said you were the light in every room." Emily's voice softened. "Maybe I burned out. Or maybe you just need someone to remind you you're still shining," he said quietly. The air between them grew still. She looked away, her heart beating too fast. She didn't want to feel this way, but part of her already did. Ryan stood up, pacing slightly. "I shouldn't have said that," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't want to make things complicated." "You haven't," she said. Though she knew it wasn't true, everything had already become complicated. That night, after he left, Emily couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed his words, the way his eyes had looked sad. Honest, conflicted. She wasn't angry at him. She was angry at herself for feeling alive again, because of someone who wasn't her husband. Yet beneath the guilt was something stronger, a need to understand why love had started to feel so far away. The next morning, Daniel called from the airport, his voice cheerful but hurried. "Just landed, love you. Talk later." He hung up before she could reply. She stared at the phone, realizing she couldn't remember the last time those words had sounded real. That afternoon, she went for a walk along the waterfront, trying to clear her thoughts. The city glimmered with spring light, families laughing, couples holding hands. And for the first time, Emily felt like she was standing outside of her own life, watching it pass by. She ended up at a small cafe they used to visit years ago, and to her surprise, Ryan was there, sitting by the window with a book. He looked up, smiled, and gestured for her to join him. They talked for hours, about everything except what they were both thinking. He asked about her art. She told him about her new painting, a portrait of a woman half in color, half in shadow. "It's about being torn," she said, "between what you want and what you're supposed to want." He nodded slowly. "That sounds familiar." When it was time to leave, he walked her to her car. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She turned to say goodbye, but words failed. For a moment they stood too close, caught between longing and restraint. Then Ryan took a step back, his voice low. "You should go home." "Emily." She nodded, her throat tight. "I know. Back at home." She stood in front of her canvas and stared at it for a long time. The woman she had painted seemed to look back at her, asking questions she couldn't answer. She picked up her brush and began to paint again, faster this time, as if she could outrun her feelings. But no matter how hard she tried, every color she touched seemed to carry his name. The next day, Daniel came home earlier than expected. He looked tired, his suit wrinkled, but his face softened when he saw her painting. "That's beautiful," he said. "I didn't know you were still working on these." "I never stopped," she said simply. He smiled faintly. "I'm glad," and then kissed her forehead before walking away to check his emails. The small gesture should have meant something, but it felt empty, like an echo from a distant time. That night, at dinner, she tried to talk to him about her feelings, about how they had grown apart, but Daniel brushed it off. "Work's been rough," he said. "Things will get better soon." She wanted to believe him, But she'd heard that promise too many times. The truth was, she didn't feel like a wife anymore. She felt like a memory kept alive out of habit. Over the next few days, Ryan kept his distance. Emily noticed but didn't reach out. She tried to focus on her marriage, to bring back what they'd lost. She cooked Daniel's favorite meals, left little notes on the fridge. But nothing changed. He appreciated the effort. But he was too distracted to see what she really needed: connection. Attention, love. Then one evening, Daniel forgot their anniversary. He called late to say he'd be staying at the office. Emily didn't cry this time. She sat alone on the couch, scrolling through old photos on her phone. Pictures of them smiling, carefree, before life became a collection of missed moments. She didn't know whether to feel angry or sad. She only felt empty. An hour later, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, Ryan stood there, holding a small box of cupcakes. "I remembered," he said softly. "Daniel mentioned your anniversary once. I didn't want you to spend it alone." Her eyes filled with tears. Not because of the gift, but because someone had remembered. They sat together on the porch, watching the rain fall. She didn't say much and he didn't push. At one point, she whispered, "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Ryan looked at her gently. "You're trying to stay loyal to something that's breaking you." She didn't answer. She just looked out at the rain, the city lights reflecting in the puddles, and thought about how life could be both beautiful and cruel at once. When he left, she stood in the doorway for a long time. Clutching the box in her hands, she knew something had to change. But she didn't know what that meant yet. Love wasn't supposed to feel like guilt, and friendship wasn't supposed to feel like temptation. Yet here she was, caught between both. As the night deepened, Emily realized she had reached a crossroad. One path led to safety, to the life she had built. The other toward uncertainty, a truth she didn't yet understand. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But she knew one thing for certain: she could no longer pretend that everything was fine. Something inside her had shifted. And once the heart begins to wake, there's no going back. When Daniel returned from work late that night, Emily was sitting on the couch, still holding the cupcake box Ryan had left. The candles she had lit for their anniversary had melted into quiet puddles of wax. He walked in, loosened his tie, and smiled weakly. "You waited up." She looked at him for a moment, her voice calm. "I wasn't waiting." Daniel, that simple sentence carried more weight than anger ever could. The next morning, their house felt colder. They spoke, but their words had no warmth. Daniel noticed the distance but didn't know how to bridge it. He blamed work, exhaustion, time, everything except himself. Emily tried to speak, but each time she opened her mouth, the silence between them grew thicker. A few days later, she decided to visit her art studio, a small rented space near the harbor. It had become her refuge, a place untouched by their growing tension. The moment she stepped inside, she felt peace. She set up her canvas and began painting again, trying to pour her confusion into color. That afternoon, Ryan appeared, carrying 2 coffees. "Daniel said you'd be here," he said, smiling softly. She didn't know whether to feel comforted or nervous. "I needed to think," she said. "Everything feels too heavy lately." He sat across from her, watching her brush move across the canvas. "You've been carrying too much for too long," he said. "You don't have to fix everything alone." Emily stopped painting, her eyes filling with tears. "But that's what marriage is, isn't it? Holding things together, even when you're breaking." Ryan shook his head. "Marriage isn't meant to break you, Emily. It's supposed to build you." His words hit her harder than she expected. She didn't respond, but her hands trembled. She knew he cared, but she also knew his presence made everything more complicated. She turned back to the canvas. "You should go, Ryan," she whispered. "Please." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll always care for you. But you have to decide what you want." When he left, she sat alone for hours, staring at her unfinished painting. Half light, half shadow. It felt like a reflection of her heart, caught between what was right and what was real that night. Daniel came home early for the first time in weeks. He found her sitting at the kitchen table, lost in thought. "We need to talk," she said quietly. He looked surprised but nodded. She took a deep breath. "We're not the same anymore. We live in the same house. But it feels like we're miles apart." Daniel frowned. "You think I don't know that? Then why haven't you done anything to change it?" she asked, her voice trembling. He sighed, rubbing his face. "I thought I was doing the right thing, working hard, making sure we had everything we needed." "We have everything," she said, "except each other." The honesty of her words broke something open. Daniel looked at her differently, as if really seeing her for the first time in a long while. "Are you saying you don't love me anymore?" "I'm saying I don't know how to feel," she admitted. "I've been lonely for too long, and I don't know when I stop being happy." They sat in silence, the clock ticking loudly in the background. Daniel's eyes softened. "Is there someone else?" he asked finally. Emily froze, not because she was guilty, but because she didn't know how to explain what Ryan meant to her. "No," she said truthfully, "but there could have been, if you hadn't come home tonight." Her honesty hit him like a wave. He didn't yell or accuse her. He just looked down, ashamed. "I didn't realize I'd lost you," he said. "I thought you'd always be there, waiting." "I was," she whispered, "until I couldn't anymore." That night, neither of them slept. They stayed in the same bed, facing opposite directions, both lost in their thoughts for the first time. Daniel felt the emptiness she had carried for years, and Emily realized she didn't want to keep living like strangers. The next morning, Daniel called in sick to work, something he hadn't done in years. He made breakfast, awkwardly but sincerely. "Let's start again," he said, handing her a cup of coffee. "I don't know how, but I'll try." Emily looked at him, uncertain, but something inside her softened. "Trying would be a good start," she said. Over the next few weeks, they began to rebuild, slowly, carefully. Daniel started coming home earlier, asking about her art, listening when she spoke. He took her to dinner, not out of guilt, but because he wanted to. And little by little, the laughter returned. Not as loud as before, but real. Ryan, meanwhile, kept his distance. He sent her a message once, a simple one that said, "I hope you're happy. That's all I ever wanted for you." She didn't reply, but she read it more than once, sometimes at night, when she stood by her window watching the city lights. She thought of him, not with regret, but with gratitude. He had reminded her of what she'd forgotten, that she deserved to be seen, to be loved in full color, not silence. Months later, Emily's art began gaining attention. Her piece, Between Light and Shadow, was chosen for a local gallery show. Daniel stood proudly beside her at the opening, holding her hand as guests admired her work. It felt strange but good, standing beside him again, not as a perfect couple, but as two people who had chosen to stay. When she looked at her painting, she saw everything she'd lived through: the loneliness, the temptation, the rediscovery of herself, and the quiet forgiveness that had come after. After the show ended, Daniel and Emily walked outside together. The night air was cool, and the streetlights cast soft reflections on the wet pavement. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You didn't just find your art again. You found us." She smiled faintly. Maybe we both just stop pretending. He nodded, slipping his arm around her shoulders. I know I hurt you, he said, but I'm not giving up on us. Not again. I don't want you to, she said. Just keep seeing me, that's all. They walked quietly after that, their steps in sync again. The road ahead wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. At home later that night, Emily found Ryan's old note tucked in one of her sketchbooks. She read it one last time before folding it away. The note said, "You found your voice, and I'm glad he finally heard it." She smiled softly, whispering, "Thank you," before placing it back where it belonged in the past. As she turned off the light, Daniel's voice came from behind her. "You coming to bed?" "Yes," she said, her voice calm, peaceful. She walked toward him, knowing that love wasn't about never breaking. It was about learning to mend. About finding your way back. Emily had been a good wife, but now she was something more. She was a woman who had learned to love with her eyes open. A woman who had remembered her worth. And as the rain began to fall outside once again, it sounded different this time, not like sadness, but like a quiet beginning. A soft reminder that sometimes the storm isn't the end. It's the start of something new.